Okay, live. Hey everyone. So back to it. I'm going to talk today about the Shelly Fire, which is happening up in Siskiyou County, near the town of Etna, and talk a little bit about other fire activity and the outlook for next couple days. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Zeke Lunder, and this is The Lookout. I'm a wildfire analyst. I've been working in wildfire since kind of mid-1990s, kind of in mapping and intel, and also in prescribed fire and fuels management. So what we'd like to do here is kind of use the tools of my trade. I'm a geographer by training, to understand kind of the big picture, what's going on with wildfires, how they're burning, how they're being managed. And so I just like to share the tools I use to understand this stuff. And then we talk about kind of just try to create kind of a reality check of our expectations of how fires are going to get put out. Try to understand fire hazard through the year, and try to just improve the wildfire literacy of folks that live in the forests. Kind of improve the forestry literacy, to talk about what forestry is all about, how land management works, what the limits are. So the Shelly Fire, we're not Watch Duty. Watch Duty is a great app that has come around in the last couple of years that is really kind of blow by blow, trying to cover as much as they can about current fires and what started where and what's happening. And we don't tend to focus as much on the small fires. The fires are just getting started. We do recommend Watch Duty. It's a great place to go to kind of get real-time coverage of what's happening with wildfires. But what we like to do here on the Lookout is dig a little more into specific fires that we think are interesting, that help kind of illuminate bigger picture challenges with forestry and fire suppression. So that said, we're going to talk about the Shelly Fire, because the Shelly Fire is emerging as an interesting fire. It's going to be a fire that's on the landscape for a long time this summer, and we'll talk about why that's the case. One thing I do want to say up front is that the Shelly Fire mapping is being done by the company that I manage. I'm the director of a company called Deer Creek Resources that I founded and no longer own, but I still direct the company. And we've got a mapping trailer up on the Shelly Fire that's helping prepare the maps for the firefighters. There's kind of a firewall between the Lookout and Deer Creek Resources. I don't get any intel from the fires that we're assigned to. I get all my intel from open source, web-based public data, and we got a pretty hard line there. We don't take data from the fire that's not already publicly published. So just want to put that out there that that's the case. Same thing with the Thompson Fire. Deer Creek Resources is providing mapping to CAL FIRE. None of the data you'll see on the Lookout comes out the back door of the trailer, so to speak. This is all stuff that's being published by the National Fire Center or by CAL FIRE, OES, or other public sources that's available to anyone. So I don't really have any privileged access to data that I use to make these broadcasts. This is not official wildfire information. This is a guy in a shed in his backyard geeking out for you. Anyway, glad you're with us. Let's jump into some maps and talk about the Shelly Fire. All right, a lot of layers on this map. One thing in particular I'm interested in about the Shelly Fire is its relationship to private forestry and fire history. But we'll just start out with a little more basic look at what's going on. So where are we at here? There we go. So here's an animation of the Shelly Fire. Shelly Fire was kind of burning in the backcountry on the backside of the Pacific Crest Trail in kind of the western edge of the Marble Mountains. And yesterday afternoon, you can see in this image, fire isn't really across the ridge yet. So the fire made a run on the backside of the ridge yesterday afternoon, and it spotted all over the place onto the fore side of the mountain. and then it got dark, and then they turned the camera back over there again, and you can see that the fire's kind of skunking around. But what was interesting to me is that, you know, we saw some really dramatic kind of extreme fire behavior here. Once the fire spotted, where it crowned right up the mountain, and then it threw out spots. And one thing that's interesting is, you know, we often don't think of crown fires. Sorry, I just got to do a little housekeeping here. We often don't think of crown fires running downhill, but it's super hot and dry and windy, and so once you have, you know, a run like this, where the fire makes kind of a slope-driven run, generates this enormous amount of heat and energy, and then these spots that get thrown out by that, they really quickly can kind of suck back into the main fire. So in that way, crown fires can move really quickly downhill because, you know, these little spots here, there's just so much heat and dynamics going on. It's already 100 degrees up there, and then you throw in like a whole forest on fire, and these spots kind of suck back in on themselves. And so crown fires can move really quickly downhill. So I watched the briefing this morning from the incident management team, and they said, hey, we got a bunch of CAL FIRE resources. We're going to go direct on this thing. We're going to put it out. This is a high priority. This slop over. We're going to have a bunch of aviation resources, etc. That's probably not going to happen, right? They're probably not going to put this thing out where it is. Looking at our weather conditions, you know, we're in the middle of a historic heat wave. It was 117 degrees or something where I live in Chico yesterday. We're breaking heat records all over Northern California. This is kind of what we call Nortop's 7-day forecast, where it shows these oranges are kind of triggers for extreme fire behavior. And so for the whole Central Valley, we've got heat as a trigger. For the area where the Shelly Fire is burning, we've got winds. We've also got heat over the kind of the western Great Basin. Everything else is extremely dry. So it's extreme fire conditions, basically. I'm gonna open up a new tab here. There's actually, right at the bottom of this hill is where the fire is burning is Cheeseville, California, which I had never heard of. But we're going to pull up some detailed weather for Cheeseville. And here we go. So this is the weather site that we use for planning prescribed fires. And it's a pretty nice kind of high resolution detailed weather for the area. So what we see today, they're talking about, hey, we're going to go direct on this forest fire that's burning mid-slope. It's 107 degrees up there this afternoon. Temperature's only going to get down to 80. The minimum RH is going to be 10%, which is critically dry. Max RH is 24%, which is pretty damn spicy for fire behavior. And we're going to have 12-mile-an-hour winds coming out of the northwest at 5 p.m. As far as our kind of forecast for the day, we see that by 1 p.m. it's going to be 100 degrees with an RH of 13. It's going to grow up to RH of 10, and we're going to have 12-mile-an-hour wind gusts coming out of kind of the northwest. So, with a kind of prevailing transport wind from the west. So what that tells me is that this afternoon we're going to have extreme fire behavior on this fire. The purple land here is private timberland. We'll get to that in a minute. But here's just looking at where the fire spotted into last night. It has been burning in the 2017 Wallow fire. So there was a lot of snags in this area because this fire had a lot of, it burned hot, and there's a lot of dead trees out here. So where it burned, so yesterday afternoon it spotted out of that, and it spotted into an area that hasn't burned for 70 years. Onto this purple, and the purple here is private timberland owned by Eco Trust Forest Management Investments, EFM. They're based out of Portland. They're a subsidiary of Eco Trust, which is kind of an environmental nonprofit. that's in the kind of forestry and fisheries sector. So this purple land is eco-trust land, and for the most part this hasn't burned. So the yellow lines here are dozer lines from 2017. So wallow, a lot of what happens with these fires like wallow is we get out ahead of them, they burn for a month or more, we get out ahead of them and put in some line, and then the fire may or may not get to that spot before it rains. So here you can see there's kind of yellow is dozer line from 2017, white is hand line. Down here is the town of Etna. So they put a lot of effort in 2017 into protecting Etna. So they put a dozer line along the base of the slope, they put a dozer line up this ridge. You know, during big fires we like to run dozers everywhere we can on ridges, and if we can't we put in a hand line in between. And part of that idea is that you're going to get out ahead of the fire, you're going to put in a line, and you're going to do a firing operation along that line. So yellow pretty much shows you where it's possible to run dozers in this country, and we already have done that in 2017. So they're going to reopen these old lines from 2017, but there's no lines out here from 2017. So I'm sure they're looking at, like, there's some old dozer line on this ridge. But in this country where we've had so many fires, if it's possible to run a dozer up a ridge, they're going to run a dozer up that ridge again. The problem is that this fire is pretty well established in the headwaters of this drainage now in heavy fuels. And they're going to hit it with everything they can with aviation and everything this morning. But this afternoon, when it's 109 degrees or 100 up there and 10% humidity and snags everywhere, this fire is going to spot and roll out, and it's going to keep burning this entire drainage. So we've got kind of this high country, barren country. I would expect, though, that this fire, by the time it's said and done, is going to burn this entire basin here. So we're looking at, here's Scott Valley, here's Fort Jones out in the foreground, Etna's back here. But I don't really see any reason that this fire is not going to burn kind of this whole west side of Scott Valley. I hope I'm wrong, but when we look at our forecast that says it's going to be 100 degrees for the next week, and at our minimum RHs are not going to get above 16, that's just critical fire behavior potential. And this country is kind of famous for large fires. Everyone criticizes the Forest Service and their big box firefighting, but usually when you get to conditions like this, nothing else is going to work, right? They're interested in keeping the fire out of Scott Valley, but there's very few opportunities really to stop this fire before it gets there, right? You can put dozer line up this ridge, physically, probably, but it would take you a week to get that dozer line ready for a firing operation that would actually make the denuded area adjacent to the fire line big enough to stop a fire that's being driven by long range spotting. So, probably the best strategy at this point for firefighting is to back off, to where the fire is going to be a week from now and start preparing that. Anyway, that's how that's how the thinking goes in the ops section. So when the ops chief stands up in front of the briefing and says, "Hey, we're going to go direct on this thing. We're going to stop it because it's a high priority," he has to say that. He has to say they're doing everything they can to keep it out of here, but they're not going to keep it out of here under these conditions, and this fire is going to burn probably until it rains, which is a long time from now, or until it runs out of fuel. Hope I'm wrong, but if you look at the kind of fire history map for this area, these are all huge fires that have burned in the kind of Klamath backcountry. And this area that's to the north of here has not burned for 100 years. This purple is that private land still. So yeah, you see this area that the fire's burning into, burned 70 years ago. It's been logged a lot since then. After this fire, this hot fire in 55, there was big flooding post-fire. It's an interesting history up here. Like, reading about it, there's this like big alluvial fan down here. So much material came down after the fire in 1955 that it created this huge deposit of kind of alluvial material in the mouth of the canyon below this 55 fire. And this creek now still kind of goes underground in the summer because there's so much kind of fresh deposition here in that last 70 years. Anyway, what we look at in the Klamath is that fires basically burn until they reach other recent fires, and this fire has got a long ways to go to the north and east before it gets to another area that's burned recently. Like, we've got this 2014 fire, the log fire. We've got the 2014 frying pan fire that burned like this whole huge area. What was that? 130,000 acres. But no reason to think that this fire is not going to fill in this gap here. Like I said, I hope I'm wrong. Okay, so that brings me to rant topic number 2. Someone says, is this not a CAL FIRE incident because of private land or just due to the extreme location? A little complicated, but here, let me show you a map here. This is what we call SRA. Gotta find it here. Kind of chunky map, but SRA is what's called state responsibility area, and that's based mainly on where there's private timberland. And so the fire right now has been burning on federal response area. It's going to burn into the SRA. Right now there's a federal team managing it. I don't know that they're going to bring in a CAL FIRE team. This fire, though, is going to threaten the state responsibility area as it grows larger. So if you look at that SRA map, yellow, SRA basically is every year the feds and the state get together and they draw a map of whose responsibility fire suppression is on the landscape. So even though you might have the state looks after private timberlands and private lands in general. The feds look after Forest Service land. But some places, it doesn't make sense to build a CAL FIRE station in an area that's mainly Forest Service land, and it doesn't make sense to build a Forest Service station in an area that's almost all private land. So they kind of horse trade, and every year they kind of revise this map, and the map shows like who's gonna pay for firefighting. There's a different map that's called the direct protection area, which is actually whose fire trucks are going to put out a fire. But the SRA map generally kind of mirrors the private timberland map and private land map in general. So that's a good question, whether or not it's a state fire. Right now it's unified command, but as the fire pushes into more SRA, you do see circumstances where they mobilize both a federal and a state team, like the Dixie Fire. That almost never works well because just about any fire I've ever been on that had two different incident command teams. Usually when a fire is that big and out of control, it just means that you've got more kind of administrative headaches, but the fire doesn't really care what color the engines are or how many people are there or what dozers are there. The fire is going to burn what it's going to burn. And so as far as I can tell, this fire is going to become established in the head here of Kidder Creek, and it's going to burn until the weather changes. Someone says, do you think the burn scars will be a tinderbox of dead fuels? That's complicated. We're going to have a friend of mine on in the next couple of days named Sam Camarto. Sam lives in Etna, and he was a resource advisor, kind of managing a lot of the firefighting and cleanup after the 2017 fire. Burnt high country conifer forest is kind of different from kind of mid-elevation burnt brushland. So there's a lot of kind of subtlety to how fires behave in burns, especially like how long it's been since the burn, what the fuels were like before the burn. It does play a factor. Like I said, often fires kind of slow down when they get to recent burn scars, and there's a lot of discussion about like, well, what's the timeline on that? Is it 7 years post-fire that you kind of stop having that Is it 10? Is it 20? And the answer is kind of, it depends on where you're at, what the fuel types are, what they were like before. But I want to talk a little bit about carbon. Carbon. It's not very sexy. It's really actually about the least exciting thing that you could talk about. Like if I started talking about this at a party, I'm sure most people would walk away. But it's we're here to geek out on forestry, right? So let's talk about it. Okay, so this purple here, so here's Etna, Cheeseville, Greenview, Fort Jones. Purple here is owned by EFM, Eco Trust Forest Management, or something like that, Forest Resources. White here is owned by a company called New Forests. Both those companies are really into carbon, forest carbon banking. And basically what that is you can sell carbon to polluters. So, or you can sell it to Southwest Airlines, or you can sell it to Nike. Companies that use a lot of fossil fuels and want to feel good about their pollution. And I mean, a lot of people who doesn't, like a lot of people, you can go to a conference and you can spend $3 to offset the emissions from flying there. When you do that, someone's making money and swapping these kind of imaginary carbon credits. And so I've talked a lot about carbon credits on here. Someone says, carbon's a better topic than talking about Bitcoin. I agree. They're both imaginary kind of constructs of bankers, though. So have to think about how they relate. But anyway, so what's going on here? EFM, Eco Trust, they got this land. This land before was owned by what's called a TIMO, or Timber Investment Management Organization, which is basically a holding company that buys and sells timberland for big institutional investors like pension funds or hedge funds. Basically, the way forestry economics works is you grow these trees, the forest gains like 6 to 10% of volume a year. So that's a good investment, right? You plant some trees, you spend $1,000 an acre, and then those trees create wood. And there's kind of a growth curve, and every year you know your trees put on 6% or 10% or whatever growth, and so it matches well with the way investors like to think about the world. If I put my money in a mutual fund for the next 50 years, what kind of interest will I gain? So for like someone who's running a big pension fund, they like timber because timber has traditionally been a pretty safe, reliable investment. You buy some timberland in Oregon, you plant some trees, and 50 years from now you're going to get a product, and it's likely going to be like, it's a pretty guaranteed, in the past it's been a pretty guaranteed return. So you got big institutional investors that aren't really foresters or don't want to manage forest land. So you get these holding companies that buy the land, sell shares basically to big investors, and then they hire like a forestry company to actually manage it and log it. And so that's a TIMO, is kind of a big holding company that manages timberland. So this purple land was owned by a TIMO. Sounds like they were kind of shady. They were based in Atlanta. Timbervest, and then at some point they wanted to get out of the business, and so Eco Trust bought this land. Similar things going on here with New Forests. New Forest has kind of consolidated a bunch of this land in white that was owned by companies like Roseburg, Michigan Cal, fruit growers, and so there's kind of these legacy companies that have held on to land. You see this land is a lot of checkerboard here. That's because a railroad got built up through Yreka, and at that time the feds gave public lands to the railroads to build. So you've got this whole kind of checkerboard all up and down California, but mainly following major corridors like I-80 and I-5 where railroads went in. So the legacy of that is that we've got this kind of every other section owned by private lands and every other section in here owned by the public. legacy of the settlement of the West. So that land has kind of been shifted around and juggled and consolidated and traded. And so the latest owners here are EcoTrust and New Forests. New Forests bought a lot of this land in the last 10 years or so from other companies who are getting out of the business. And some of these companies kind of got the memo that forest fire was eating their lunch. And so there wasn't a huge amount of interest when this land came up for sale. This Michigan cow and fruit growers land wasn't a huge amount of interest from the big players, because most of the big timber players are trying to kind of reduce their fire risk footprint. Big companies like Sierra Pacific Industries, Roseburg, they've taken huge losses in the last 15 years from forest fires, and they've kind of started to really rethink their exposure. But companies like New Forest, EFM, they've got this kind of scheme going where they're like, hey, we're going to make money. We're not going to rely on timber harvest to make money. We're going to work the carbon markets, and we're going to make money off the land by not logging it. People are going to pay us not to log it. So that's what's going on here in this purple land, is that there hasn't been a lot of logging on this land in the last 20 years. TimberVest didn't do a lot there. And then EcoTrust. So if you read, EcoTrust has put this into a conservation easement with the Siskiyou Land Trust. And they have also put it into a carbon investment where they said, hey, here's all the trees we have growing. If you look at our neighbors are clear cutting. And so they're storing X amount of carbon on the landscape, and we could legally clear cut this all, but we're not going to clear cut it. We're going to just mainly let it go, and we're going to grow a lot more carbon than we would have if we were going to clear cut it like we can. So someone is paying them for like 75,000 tons of carbon a year or something. Someone is, and they're selling that to some other company that wants to pollute and say that they've got a carbon neutral footprint. So that's how carbon works. So anyway, told you it wasn't very sexy, but what's happening now is the forest fire is burning onto their carbon investment. And so I just come back to this idea that, man, growing trees in fire-prone landscapes and selling long-term kind of promise that you're going to store these trees for the long term in a place where you have a history of massive fires burning the whole landscape, it's kind of shady. And the whole carbon markets haven't very well addressed the fire risk. So in this case, they've got kind of a formula. They said there's an 8% risk that you'll have a fire in every given year because there's big fires nearby. But by putting this into a conservation easement, they were actually able to change their scorecard and knock 2 points of insurance off. So they're basically they have to put 22% of the carbon that they're selling into kind of what's called a risk pool, meaning that someone else, if your carbon investment burns up, then you need to buy back carbon from someone else who put it into this insurance pool. So that's a crazy shell game. And if this fire does burn this entire drainage, like it well could because we've got such extreme conditions, this entire 18,000 acre carbon investment project could also go up in smoke. So there you go. Not very sexy at all, but I think interesting because these guys are basically getting, they're trying to sell this as that they're protecting the watershed and that they're increasing habitat value by not logging it. When we all know that not managing land is kind of what got us into the mess we're in. Like the Forest Service has not been really managing much of this land either. And we see that it's all burning up. So there's kind of this existential crisis with conservation and Forest Service and private timberland of how do we continue to survive growing trees in these landscapes that are increasingly fire prone. And so I think my thought here is just that just because you say that this is in conservation ownership and that we're going to manage it better and that we have got carbon wise forestry going on, so far they haven't really done a lot of work. They've done some thinning down here using public money, by the way. these areas in light blue are places that there's been fuel reduction. So, I mean, hopefully that fuel reduction pays some dividends, but what we've seen also is that when you've got a big landscape scale forest fire, that a mid-slope fuel break isn't necessarily going to buy you much, and that we really need to focus our fuels work on areas adjacent to communities. So this is good here. I mean, that they stand around where these people live on their property, but a lot of the stuff, you know, we're going to thin this road, mid-slope road, isn't necessarily going to stop a big fire like this. Someone says, can EcoTrust insure their forest? I don't think they can. So, in some ways, like a big out of the area company that's buying this land and sitting on it, they're kind of like an absentee landlord or slumlord even, right? Where they're just like, they bought the property, they're making money off of it, they're going to put as little as possible into it so they can make as much money as possible. Anyway, this is kind of playing out across lots of areas. This particular carbon investment is not what's called a CARB compliant investment. There's all these different markets for forest carbon. Some are like regulated by the government. Some are regulated by themselves. So when you buy a carbon offset to make you feel better about flying to a climate conference, that might just be. I mean, a lot of it's turned out to be total horseshit. Right? There's been a lot of articles on that, like, hey, we're planting trees in Africa, and then they plant the trees, and then locals cut them down for firewood or whatever. Craziness, but that's just frames, kind of. I think that's one thing that makes this an interesting fire, is that one, it might cook a bunch of carbon investment, and two, when you've got all this overstocked, fire-prone land on the edge of a huge wilderness area, like this is all the Marble Mountain wilderness out here. Probably the best thing you could do for a lot of this land out in the Marble Mountains is let lightning fires burn, especially now that it's all been kind of patchworked fires over the years. However, when you've got the state responsible for protecting private timberland, no one really in decision making wants to let a fire burn in the backcountry in the Klamath now, because over the summer, as it gets hot and dry, it's going to burn out here, and it's going to burn up this sick, thick, nasty private timberland. So CAL FIRE, their job is to protect private timberland. So there's this huge incentive for people not to let fires burn in the backcountry, even though that fires burning in the backcountry of the Klamath is probably going to be the only thing that ensures that we continue to have forests in the Klamath at all. So the kind of implications of this kind of shell game playing out across this 18,000 acres, they extend well beyond this 18,000 acres, and it actually affects management decisions on this entire several 100,000 acres of backcountry land. Someone says, will they replant the way timber would, creating tree plantations that are so bad for the forest, or will they let the forest return in a better way? I think that's kind of this ongoing discussion, is what to do post-fire. There's a lot of talk in forestry about creating more fire resilient stands, into more climate resilient stands. So I don't know what they'll do, if they'll replant. They don't have to. If it burns, they don't have to replant it. And if they do replant it, are they going to sell that carbon too? I'd love, if you're a carbon forester, I'd love to, or if you work with EcoTrust, I'd love to hear kind of about what the long-term vision is for this. I read kind of the documents that say, hey, we're going to have longer rotations, we're going to make it better. But what's that mean? What's that mean in reality? Like, how do you take this kind of scabby, burnt over, difficult to access, slow-growing forest and actually manage it? In the past, you could see they managed it by building roads and yanking out all the big trees. What's that look like going forward? What's that look like after you burn it up? You burn it up, you salvage it, you have some money to work with to reforest, but then you've got to wait 50 to 100 years for that to grow again. And a lot of companies are seeing that they replant and it's going to get burned again because forests are getting hotter and drier. The Klamath's going to always be a difficult place to fight fire. And what we see like in around where I live in Concow, in Butte County, Sierra Pacific Industries had land there that they cut in the 90s, replanted, it burned in 2008, they replanted it again and it burned in a campfire. So rather than plant it a third time, they recognized that they were kind of standing in a dangerous position on that landscape, and they walked away from that particular ownership. So that's an example of kind of climate adaptation, right? They're retreating from a high hazard. It's like deciding you're not going to rebuild in a floodplain. So I think the interesting part of the story here is just that this legacy, this ownership pattern that we see here is just a legacy of things that goes back to the railroad days and the original kind of Homestead Act, where private land was homesteaded, timber companies came in around the turn of the century and kind of by hook and crook consolidated a lot of that. And so now we've, over 100 years on, we've got this kind of fragmented ownership pattern that drives the economics of how this land's going to get managed, who the players are going to be. And it's worth noting that all this land is stolen from the Karuk people, from the Shasta people, that all this, every little colored dot you see on here, every colored square, that's land that was Karuk land or Shasta land. That was, no one asked them before they took it. And so to have, it's kind of insult to injury to have outsiders, financial wizards, continuing to make decisions about how this land is going to be managed when there's still native people living here who have great vision of how to put fire on the land and restore the forest. Just kind of boggles the mind. Anyway, every yellow dot here is a structure, and this fire is going to burn for a while, and we'll keep an eye on it. So let's jump to some other fires. All right. So we had a fire yesterday in Placerville. We can go by the Thompson Fire real quick here. On our way. Thompson Fire burned last Tuesday. The interesting thing about Thompson Fire was just that, I'll make our fires a little easier to see here. Let's see, I think you're gonna need to watch me work on the computer. Interesting thing about Thompson Fire, and I think a lot of these fires, is that, sorry, not my, what's going on here? Sorry, I got a little Google Earth malfunction. Dang. Give me a second here. There we go. That's part of what happens with the live stream is you gotta once in a while watch the computer guy geek. Alright. Still didn't do it. Alright. Thompson Fire burned on Tuesday. It started near Orville and it ran hard to the east with a strong west wind. And I think one thing that's interesting about this fire is that the fire was pretty much done on the second day. Like overnight, we had a ton of resources, the wind stopped blowing, really good firefighting, a lot of aviation, and the fire was done. But it's taken a week really for them to declare containment. And so I think when you see a fire that's, they're saying it's 5% contained or, 10% contained, and you can't see any smoke on the cameras, like it tells you something. But that I think my point is just that if you look on the web and you see like, oh, this fire is still only 5% contained, that doesn't mean that it's still spreading. right? Because this fire hasn't grown for 5 days, but the containment's only gone up a little each day. So you need to read containment with a grain of salt. And the web cameras are really handy because you can look at the webcam and say, oh, there's no smoke at all. That tells you more than you would learn from like looking at containment. So I think people see, hey, the fire's only 5% contained, and they think that it's still spreading. And oftentimes that's not the case. So this fire was done spreading. It takes a long time to kind of mop up and secure. Contained means that the firefighters can walk away. So if you're a fire boss, yeah, you don't want to declare it contained before you've put out all the burning stumps and all the burning snags and everything else. You need to keep those resources in your pocket in case you have a wind event and the fire takes off again. But I'd say, like, look for more than one source of information. Like look at a web camera, or try to find some independent folks that are like out doing live streams on the ground, like Henderson. There's some great folks that are doing YouTube streams. I forget Henderson's first name, but cultivate some people that have a better idea what's going on. Because if you just go by percent containment, it's easy to be like, oh my God, it's only 5% contained. It's like, no, actually it's done. It's done spreading. They just need time to clean it up. Okay, so I'm gonna come down here to Placerville. I think that's the crazy thing of this map with all these dots on it is like each one of those is a structure that's built in the forest. So you can see when we talk about like having these like overwhelming kind of urban interface fuels problems, like it's pretty hard to comprehend just how many people live in high hazard areas, and how kind of impossible it is to kind of fire safe all these places. So yesterday we had a fire at the Placerville Airport. That's not it. Here we go. This fire started off and it ran pretty well in this kind of corridor of heavy fuels. You can see they had a lot of aviation on it. These fuels are insanely thick, and like everywhere else, it was super hot and dry yesterday. They had a lot of little spots, but they got on it. They hit it hard, and it was a good save. Aviation is just so important to these fires in our kind of most explosive areas, and so that's one of the things that makes me nervous when we get into busy season like this, is that there's a lot of aviation resources, and you need a lot of them to put out a fire like this. And so when we start to have like 4 or 5 fires like this going at once, then they start having to make the really difficult decisions of which ones are going to get retardant, which ones aren't. They're looking at maps like this too, and they're saying like, hey, that fire's good. We're not going to send retardant to that one because this one over here is like threatening 10 times as many homes. So come, a little later in the year when things are really busy, these folks who are deciding where the tankers get to go have a really tough job, because you might have 4 different fires that are asking for a no divert, meaning, hey, don't take our tankers because we've got structures are going to burn. At some point, tankers are going to get diverted. Okay, big fire down here. Talk about a little lake fire. I haven't been following this one super closely. I don't know this country super well. Our crews did work on the Zaka fire back in 2007, I think. So I just want to pull up the fire history real quick here, if it loads here. So we've got Los Alamos, Los Olivos, kind of San Ynez Valley, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria up here, and kind of this no man's land in the Los Padres National Forest. So if you look at fire history here, you can see just like the Klamath, this place has got kind of an enormous fire history. Big fires, La Brea Fire, Alamo Fire, Big Dalton, Zaka. Let's see if we can outline the Zaka here. So this is a Zaka fire here. Maybe I'm wrong. They're all stacked up on top of each other. This is a 1993 fire that burned 45,000 acres. Where are you, Zaka? There's Zaka. Zaka. Let's outline the Zaka in a different color. There's the Zaka fire. Zaka really was a big fire. Like it burned all the way from Highway 33. How big was Zaka? 250,000 acres, basically. Interesting, you can see the Zaka fire ran into this 1995 fire and they put it out there. Oftentimes that's because there was a fire line that was built from the previous fire, or that's just a spot on the landscape that makes sense to corral a big fire. So we see often over and over that the same fires, like this 1923 fire actually burned up to the same ridge as Zaka, and this 1993 fire, the Mar fire, burned up to the same line. So you see that in a lot of places. Like, hey, you've got a few tactical ridge lines in an entire landscape where we're going to go to put out a big fire. So when you hear about the big box, oftentimes that's just like, that's where you have an opportunity to control fire. So the problem with this fire here is that it's already kind of spotted over some of these historic kind of places that you would hope to catch it. So this ridgeline here, it's been a major ridgeline where fires have been stopped in the past, and this fire has it's over that now. So it's just time to draw a bigger box. So it's another one of those fires that's going to burn for a long time. It's early in the season. You know, that's one of the things about this kind of hot, dry weather. You hope that a fire, like, you know, the Zaka fire got started, I think, later in the year. So when you have a start like this in July, you've got all of July and August out ahead of you. Zaka doesn't tell me when it started. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Lookout, we're mainly NorCal focused, and I don't really know the issues as well in SoCal, what's going to be interesting about this fire. So we'll give you some updates, but we're not going to probably be covering this one like we'd cover a fire in Klamath, in large part because this is fire country and these are fire adapted ecosystems, and this, to me, is just not a tragedy. If we burn, yeah, it's going to be smoky and we're going to spend a lot of resources and a lot of firefighters aren't going to get to go home. But look at this landscape. This landscape has had gazillion fires on it in the last 100 years, and it doesn't appear to be, there's vegetation all over it. It's brush. It's wildland, right? It's pure California wildland, and you're probably not going to hurt it with fire. So let me jump back over here to Livestream page. Anyone got any questions? Someone says it's chewing some acres today. And we need more coastal influence. Instead, we have red flags. Yeah, for sure. I was going to throw up our structure layer here so we can talk about, like when I said this is really backcountry. Just so you can see kind of where people live, and where the people live around the edges of this wildland is where we're going to, see firefighting, and where we're going to see kind of steering the tactics. But as I said, like this whole area, no structures out there, a lot of wilderness. So obviously the firefighters want to keep it out of Santa Ynez, and they want to protect ranches and homes along these corridors on the edges, on the margins of this. But there's not a lot of kind of cultural, like what you'd say, that brush doesn't vote, right? So firefighting, fire chiefs work for the public. Politics matters. So they're going to focus on all these yellow dots that represent voters, basically. Coastal influence is important. That's a good point. Is that oftentimes we have hot and dry weather in the interior, and it brings in our fog, and the fog can, in finer fuel types, can really suppress fire behavior. And Kelly Mayer says, how close to Sedgwick Reserve? Hey Kelly. 7 miles. And close to Neverland. Neverland Ranch Amusement Park. So until they get a break on the weather, this fire also is going to do big things. The webcams. Let's see here. I figure out how to drive my computer here. There we go. So pull up a webcam here. You got to bear with me as I jump around here. I'm kind of not linear, so I pull back up my camera and it's on in Scott Valley. So I got to see what's happening in Scott Valley there. You guys are just kind of along for in the Intel shack. So you see the fire's backing and just kind of smoldering along today, this morning. But with all the spots and everything, like, yeah, when they say they're going to go direct, they mean they're going to dump a whole lot of water on it with heavy helicopters, and they're going to dump a bunch of retardant, and then the fire this afternoon is going to get up and do what it was going to do anyway. Andrew K says, can you talk briefly about where you find the public data to import into Google Earth? Asking for all my secrets, man. Sorry. Yeah, send me a DM or get a hold of me through thelookout.org, and I can answer some of those questions. Colson en route with a 2 C-130s and a 737. Which fire are you talking about with Colson? I'll share another little kind of cool site that a lot of us use. It's called Flight Radar 24. This shows all the airplanes doing anything anywhere. Here you go. Yep. Reading. We got a tanker and another tanker. They're sending the big guns up here. Look at that. You got 3 in a row. There's a C-130. And they're going to Etna. They're gonna spread some mud. Here's your air attack. Yeah, flight radar is pretty cool. So there's a lead plane here. Basically, these heavy tankers, they need a lead plane to kind of show them where to drop. And so the lead is pretty awesome. You can spend hours on here. You watch these planes coming up from Reading in a convoy. They all left it. As soon as, basically, when we're looking at this alert cam, you can see that the fire's pretty smoked in. And so the air ops guys are up there, air attack, flying around. And until right now, it's been too smoky for them to drop to see where to go. So pretty much as soon as they're ready, they say, hey, we can actually see where we're going. These folks here are blasting off from Reading inbound, and the lead plane took off from Reading a little while earlier, and they've been up doing a little recon. And so what you'll see is once these planes come in, the lead plane will be kind of orbiting the fire, and they'll have the tankers come in quite a bit higher where they can kind of see a feral cat. They can see the big picture, and the lead will be like, hey, okay, I'm going to fly it. You can see me here. I'm going to fly it and tell you where I want the retardant, and then they might even like punch a little like smoke off. That's like a little trail that they shoot some oil into their exhaust, and it creates like a little smoke line. And then the lead plane actually flies the route where they want the retardant, and the other plane follows them. So it allows the other plane to kind of focus just on following the leader, and the leader's job is to find a safe approach and make sure that the tanker doesn't fly in the mountain. And then the tanker can kind of, basically, you can't use heavy air tankers without a lead plane. So anyway, the C-130 tanker is going to come in, the lead plane is going to pick them up, and they'll drop. And so oftentimes when I don't have a good perimeter, I can look at where the drops are happening and get an idea of the tactics. So you got the lead plane is flying right now at 8,000 feet. You got the air attack is flying at 9,000, and these guys are coming in at 9,000 as well. So the lead's going to be a little bit lower. The terrain out here is like 6,000 feet. So anyway, flight radar 24. This, and if you can get on an online scanner like Radio Reference or Broadcastify, or you can listen to the air-to-air traffic, and you can hear the lead plane talking to the other guys and telling where to go, and it creates a pretty interesting, kind of compelling narrative. So yeah, you can spend the whole summer sitting on your computer. Anyway, we'll check back on these guys in a few minutes. Let's go check out what's happening for aviation down on in Santa Maria here. You got this Cal Fire lead plane. Here's another guy that's been scouting, and then here's Tanker 911. So look, here's the lead plane here, and the tanker is following them, and these guys are flying this ridge. So this tanker is going to drop where these guys tell them to. So you can see they've been dropping probably for a while here, and they keep flying this line here. So Tanker 911, they're at 4,500 feet, going 144 knots. Figueroa Campground. The tanker's dropping in elevation. Lead plane is a little higher. Anyway, the crazy thing about all this to me is that on a day like today, oftentimes this is all wasted money. Like on days like today, they're gonna drop a lot of mud on the Shelly Fire. I hope I'm wrong, but I expect that the Shelly Fire is gonna keep burning that whole watershed. And you've got the the cost, and you've got the environmental impact of dropping millions, literally millions of gallons of phosphorus-rich fertilizer basically on the whole landscape. It's a fertilizer, so vegetation grows back vigorously after you drop it. It's bad for water. It gets in the water, it kills fish. They really try hard to drop not in water, but it does happen. And so I got to say, all in all, the aviation people are really on it. They very rarely, they try not to waste their effort. And super experienced people running these air shows. But oftentimes when the conditions are the worst, the aviation doesn't really buy us a lot of, doesn't stop the biggest fires on the worst days. All right, let's go back up to, so let's see our cavalry of mudslingers is getting up there. So we'll see where they're dropping, what their strategy is. Oftentimes if the conditions are really bad, they do put the mud on the heel of the fire or on the flank where it actually will be useful. But there's also a tendency to use aviation for public relations. No one wants to have the fire burn the town and then say, hey, how come you weren't flying air tankers? They don't want to hear someone say like, oh, well, it wasn't going to work that day. Like, people want to know that you did everything you could to save their town. So it's understandable. Like everything in fire, it's political. But the power of the retardant companies and the aviation contractors is substantial. These are like mega companies. There was a new retardant that came out on the market last couple of years that was based on a different chemistry, based on salt instead of fertilizer, and they were just ready to get to market with it. It was gonna. There's really kind of a monopoly on retardant with Phoscheck, which is owned by a company called Perimeter Solutions. So as a new company emerged, and it turned out that they had corrosion issues with it in their tanks, and so they pulled it off the market. Anyway, I think talking about retardant is almost as boring as talking about carbon. Feral Cat says we're super vigilant regarding impacts with our drops. Can you tell us more about that, Feral Cat? What do you do? What's your experience with fire aviation? This tanker got diverted, looks like, or I don't know what they're doing. These guys are just flying around circles now. Where'd the lead plane go? Lead plane's off somewhere else. All right, people. So I'm going to jump in real quick to a different site. I check. Thanks, Ryan Stevens. Here's a site I like a lot. It's called wildfireintel.org, and it's kind of a chat group. I'll put it in a link here. A lot of folks on here who know a lot about fire. Been using this site. I've been on this site for 18 years, and pretty cool. I recommend you checking it out. I post on there as pyrogeography, so a lot of the stuff I'm sharing on here I'll be sharing on there also. But a lot of expertise and a lot of kind of just great perspective. A lot of people posting on here who've been on fires, in the Klamath for the last, their whole career. Like on the lake fire here, they'll share like, hey, here are these are the frequencies that are being used on the fire. So if you're in an area and you have a scanner, you can find stuff. People are talking about the Zaka fire. They're sharing webcam pictures. So I spent a lot of time looking at this. There's this discussion on here of OES and like how they decide which engines are going where, and the politics between Cal Fire and OES. So wildfireintel.org, good site. So kind of that's one of my go-tos. The webcams are definitely a go-to. Got some weather pages I like. We're going to put some of the stuff back up. We're going to get back into posting more on the lookout.org, but been too busy to really keep on top of this stuff, and that's going to keep happening if we get deployed, as we get deployed to more fires. I'm going to be kind of torn. I'll be trying to jump on here as much as I can, but we also have kind of our own operations to keep running. We can be on up to 4 or 5 fires at once, and so here just we're back on the fire in Scott Valley, just looking at the fire behavior this morning, and you can see like these are all the spot fires that got going yesterday. Those fires on the steep country, they roll out basically like burning stumps and stuff. Chunks of wood, they roll down the hill, they start fires down below, then these fires can then run back uphill. So that's why I said, going direct in this country, you don't do it on a steep slope like this. You're not going to come out and put a bunch of crews here to cut fire line below this fire, because it's going to roll down below them and burn up the hill and kill them. So we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot over the last 100 years about how to kill firefighters, and a lot of our tactics are based on not doing that. So this whole big box idea of staying on the ridges, working out ahead of the fire, that's informed by not killing firefighters. So, and jump back over to flight radar. What's going on now? Lead plane's back around. This tanker. These guys are still pretty high. I think they're trying to figure out where to go. Tanker 16. This guy just kind of went for a little sightsee, kill some time. All right. Yeah, someone wants me to give more locations. Sorry about that. All right. I think with this stuff, folks, if I'm going to do these long live streams, kind of got to get comfortable just kind of not talking once in a while and just like letting it play, because I need time to think about what I'm going to talk about and find what I'm going to look at next, etc. I got to boogie out of here pretty quick, but keep covering this fire. I'm trying not to get too predictive. You know, I think when I did the live stream in Orville, I predicted that the fire was going to burn into Kelly Ridge, and it didn't. And so it's kind of like being the weatherman. You know, like I want to predict stuff and then be right and look super smart. But when I do that, oftentimes, you know, I'm wrong, or it just it's unnecessary. So this prediction here that this fire is going to burn this whole area up here. I think it will, but I think mainly one of the things I want to do with this this stuff is explain to you like why we go indirect, why fires get big. I think when fires get big, there tends to be this blame game. Oh, the Forest Service doesn't know how to fight fire, or they just draw a big box and burn everything inside of it. And I want to communicate just you know, what I've learned over the last 30 years in this business, working with people who have to make those calls, and maybe run a little kind of guerrilla PR for the folks that are, you know, there's a lot that the public information officers can't say, and there's a lot that goes into coming up with tactics to actually corral these crazy weather-driven fires. So that's what we want to talk about on here, is just what works, what doesn't, what's political, what's useful, and give you all some context so we can kind of have less blame and more kind of just informed conversation. I was up here in Scott Valley in 2014 when the whole frying pan fire was burning. It was an interesting fire for me. We were making maps, so I'm gonna fly back up here from SoCal quick. Also want to give a shout out to CalTopo. CalTopo, I'm using CalTopo's overlays right now for all the structures and everything. If you go to caltopo.com and you get an account there, it's a pretty rad app, CalTopo. It's kind of like GIS Lite. A lot of what I do in here is stuff that, between Google Earth and CalTopo, you can do a lot of kind of cool map making. So if you pay for a subscription to CalTopo, you can use their base maps. You can turn on and off. Like I've got my own layers loaded in here that I created in GIS. But like these structures, I can turn on parcels in here. So I'm paying for a pro version that I think it's like $30 a year. It'll show you like, so all this like Wildcat Whiskey LLC, that's actually like the holding company that's part of the EcoTrust Forest Management. But you get structures, you get public lands, you can turn on MODIS, which is like the heat satellites. You can turn on shade relief, you can turn on LiDAR. So anyway, if you pay for the pro subscription, then you can load up their layers into Google Earth. So that's how I'm doing, like in here. I can turn on like LiDAR and have super detailed hillshades. It's good stuff. Anyway, thanks. Well, you didn't want to watch me drive my computer anyway. I need like a little earbud where Ryan Stevens can be like, "Hey, dude, turn on your map." So I just want to talk about the frying pan fire for a minute here. Frying pan fire started in Happy Camp, and it burned this whole section of the national forest. And so I was in Fort Jones. I was working for the long-term analysts on the fire, and so basically their job is to kind of figure out, run models and figure out where the fire is going to go, and figure out kind of different probabilities of success of different strategies. And so a lot of what I've learned about how fires get fought in this country has just been kind of as a mapping analyst, helping the folks that are trying to kind of plan out. So on a fire like this, like the frying pan, they would say like, hey, let's run a model and see, like, given historic weather, how many days do we think it'll be until the fire gets to Highway 96? Or how many days until it gets to Scott Bar? How long would it take for the fire to get from where it is to this ridge here? Based on that, do we have time to, thin along 20 miles of the PCT and do a backfiring operation? So when you see, like, when I talk about the big box, it's like, okay, this ridge was identified as a spot where there was access, where it's possible to get out, a week ahead of the fire and prep a ridge. And so you end up having hotshot crews, out way out ahead of the fire, prepping this, firing it at night. Right now the conditions are such that firing operations at night are still, usually you fire at night because you have humidity recovery and milder fire behavior. But when our humidity recovery is only like 25% and it's 80 degrees, those aren't great burnout conditions. We want it to be, 40% humidity and 60 degrees or other. So there's a lot of the kind of prescribed fire science that goes into looking at, like, hey, can we get away with the night firing operation? Or is our night firing operation just going to, like, spot, and are we going to be able to control it? So that's kind of like these teams that are out managing these fires. They have what's called like a long-term analyst. They have a fire behavior analyst. They have a meteorologist, and they're right now looking at these scenarios of, how's this fire going to spread? How big is it going to get? I'm going to see if I can pull up one other site here that's kind of cool. Haven't used it for a while. I worked on a project a little while ago that was called the Pyrogens Project, and I think I'm remembering that it only runs in Chrome, maybe. And this project was supported by California Energy Commission. It was kind of a research grant to look at, it's actually the CPUC, California Public Utility Commission. And so it's supposed to be this open source modeling framework where you can simulate fire spread. So here's Shelly. And so let's say 90th percentile, and see if it's working. Live demo, sometimes it's sketchy. Sometimes it takes a while to load, but basically this is a spread model that gives you a look at what, given the weather and fuels conditions, let's see if it's going to work. Doesn't look like it's working. Well, let's see what happens. Well, when it was working, it was pretty cool. Anyway, what do we do? Modeling's sketchy. We're not very good at portraying complexity of forest fire with numbers. All it takes is like a kind of freak. The weather's the weak link. We just don't have very good weather models that get down to the micro scale. Anyway, Sorry that one didn't work, but Fire doesn't care. Fire doesn't care. Let's see if it'll work in Firefox. Nope. All right. That's technology for you. People spend a ton of money building some sort of platform to do something or other, and then no one uses it, and then it stops working. Okay. Okay, man and women. Thanks, everyone. If you like this stuff, please support the Lookout. We run on donations. You can go to thelookout.org and put a link in here. Go over there and but what we really like is if you can, pony up like $5 a month or something. I know that I don't cover a lot of stuff in the winter, but those subscriptions, they pay for my internet, they pay for my radios, they pay for my camera gear, they pay for me to take time off work to do the research and bring you this stuff. So super duper appreciate all the Lookout subscribers. We're going to come out with some more newsletters. My newsletter guy is hot to trot, and so it's fire season, and we'll see y'all often. Bye.